Stories Philippines podcast.
A darkness permeates this episode, touching on scenes and themes some may find deeply unsettling. Vigilance is a necessity for the sensitive listener. The heavens opened, not with a blessing, but with a torrent that was biblical in its fury. It was July of 2005, and the air across the islands of the Philippines was heavy, thick with the smell of rain and the unspoken dread that precedes a true calamity. The wind began as a mournful whisper through the coconut fronds, a sound that quickly escalated into a screaming banshee as Typhoon Feria, known internationally as Haitang, made its terrifying presence felt. The storm did not merely pass. It settled over the land, unleashing a deluge that turned roads into raging rivers and low-lying villages into submerged, watery tombs. For the people of the Philippines, the annual Dance with Typhoons is a grim routine, yet each one carries a unique signature of destruction. Feria brought water, an unfathomable amount of it, pushing the boundaries of what was merely a flood and what felt like a world dissolving. The rivers swelled, the seas rose, and the boundaries between the land and the deep became terrifyingly blurred. As homes were inundated, as the familiar landmarks disappeared beneath a muddy, violent brown current, a primal fear took hold. It was the fear that the forces of nature, long abused and neglected, had finally decided to unleash a retribution that was both elemental and deeply spiritual. In the midst of this liquid chaos, the old whispers, those ancient stories the elders told on dry, quiet nights, took on a terrifying new clarity. The legends of the deep, the tales of the sea folk, the mermaids and mermen of Philippine folklore, the sirena and the siakoy, they were not just fanciful stories anymore. They were the key to understanding this wrath. They were the vengeful entities rising from the depths, furious at the pollution, the greed, the utter disregard for the sanctity of the water that was their home. This was the ocean exacting its price, and the currency was human sorrow. I am Jessica, and you are listening to Stories Philippines podcast, Season 3, Episode 4. The Typhoon Feria of 2005 was not a quiet, isolated tragedy. It was a roar heard around the world. As the storm surge and relentless rain battered the archipelago, the capital city of Manila and surrounding provinces found themselves paralyzed. The numbers alone tell a chilling tale. Dozens killed, tens of thousands displaced, and a massive scale of damage to crops and infrastructure. But beyond the statistics, a deeper, more unsettling narrative began to emerge, whispered in the dry aftermath by those who survived the highest floodwaters. In the aftermath of the storm, amidst the heartbreaking search for the missing and the grim cleanup, one young man, who goes by the name Fanny Suga in his correspondence, recalls the intense, personal fear of traversing the flood-swollen streets near his home. The water had climbed quickly, transforming a familiar bridge into a perilous crossing. It was a midday that looked like night, the sky a bruised purple-black, the rain lashing down with blinding force. With roads impassable, his only option was to wade, holding onto a safety rope installed by local officers. The water was up to his waist, a cold, powerful current that threatened to sweep him away. But it was not the current that paralyzed him with terror. It was a sensation, a sudden cold weight wrapping around his legs, the tightening coil of something alive and desperate. His mind flashed to the ancient horror of the serpent of the flood, a sawa perhaps, washed down from the mountains. He screamed, his hands locked on the rope, until desperation forced him to break his grip and blindly grope at the unseen horror pulling at his knees. What he found was not a monster of the flood, but a small child, a boy, barely 10 years old, unconscious and tangled around his legs. The moment he pulled the boy's head above the surging current, he saved a life. A harrowing rescue in the very mouth of the watery disaster. But the sheer terror, the feeling of something inhuman grappling with him in the deepest part of the flow, left him shaking. A profound chill settling into his bones that was more than just the cold of the floodwater. It was the chill of a near miss, the realization of how close he had come to being another victim swallowed by the storm. He writes, "I returned home shivering, a slow, crawling horror throughout my body. What if he hadn't grabbed me? What if I hadn't lifted his head in time?" It is a question that hangs heavy in the air, a breath held over the deep water. The experience of Fan ni Suga echoes the shared trauma of communities hit by such catastrophic floods. The water that brings life also brings death, and often the dead linger. In the wake of any great disaster, especially one involving the violent uprooting of the earth, the boundaries between the living and the spectral become porous. The sheer force of the flood can unearth, relocate, and hide the remains of the dead, trapping restless spirits in the very mud and water that took their lives. Kiffy, another correspondent, shares the macabre reality of the post-Feria cleanup in her town. The storm's power had been such that massive amounts of earth and debris were forced into the lower floors of homes. While clearing out the mud, her neighbor's family made a horrific discovery in their living room: a corpse. A stark testament to the flood's indiscriminate violence. Since that day, Kiffy notes, a disembodied head has begun to appear in the neighbor's kitchen, a silent, unsettling reminder of the unquiet dead buried in the heart of their home. In Kiffy's own family, the lingering presence of a small boy, a child spirit, became a permanent resident after the typhoon. He first appeared in their old house, and even after the structure was torn down and replaced with a new one, he remained. The little boy is known to pull at the toes of the sleeping and to mischievously scatter toys when the house is empty. Her relatives believe his restlessness stems from being too deeply buried under the earth by the flood, a classic folklore concept where spirits are trapped because their graves or remains are disturbed or incomplete. The land itself, having been violently churned by the water, holds the sorrow of the spirits trapped within its new, disordered layers. This kind of lingering child spirit, often associated with a tragic, sudden death, is a feature found in many global folkloric traditions. From the La Llorona wailing woman of Latin America whose children drowned, to the small, lost children of Irish ghost stories. They represent not just the loss of innocence, but the collective grief of a community that has witnessed its most vulnerable members swept away by a power they could not control. The fear, the trauma. It is not only in the visible. Kiffy recounts the unsettling sound of a slow, deliberate walk, punctuated by the unmistakable clank of a ball and chain coming from the house where her cousin's boyfriend stayed after the flood. The sound of a chained foot, a clear auditory hallucination or genuine paranormal event, speaks to the prison of the aftermath, the sense of being trapped, weighed down and unable to move on after the disaster. It is a sonic embodiment of the heavy, dragging burden of survival. In the darkest corners of her memory, Kiffy recalls her own peripheral vision being haunted by a small, shining white boy who would dart away when looked at directly. It was a fleeting presence, but a constant one during her childhood, culminating in an encounter with a local spiritual healer, an albulario, who cryptically mentioned a boyfriend close to her. Whether this was the shining specter, a spirit companion attached to her from the disaster's shadow, is left as a chilling, open question. It is a powerful illustration of how the trauma of a massive storm does not just destroy homes. It reshapes the spiritual landscape of a place, filling the empty spaces with the lost and the mournful. To understand the deeper currents of fear that typhoons like Feria unearth, we must look away from the storm's immediate devastation and toward the deep cultural mythology of the sea and water in the Philippines. This is where the vengeful spirits, the true elemental forces, reside. The two primary figures of this aquatic folklore are the sirena and the sea koi. The sirena, the Filipino mermaid, is not the Disney-fied benevolent figure of international fame. While often beautiful, she is a creature of deep mystery and danger. She is often seen as a temptress who uses her enchanting song and beauty to lure fishermen and young men to their deaths, dragging them down to her underwater kingdom. The sea koi, her male counterpart, is the merman, frequently depicted as a more grotesque figure, a sea monster with scales, dark skin, and a monstrous face, driven by a fierce, protective, or perhaps predatory instinct over the sea. In the old beliefs, these figures are not merely magical. They are guardians and judges of the aquatic realm. They represent the untamed, unpredictable power of the ocean, a power that demands respect. When humans pollute their waters, practice destructive fishing, or simply show insolence toward the sea, the sirena and sea koi are the instruments of elemental revenge. A typhoon, in this view, is not just a weather phenomenon. It is the sea folk opening the floodgates of their wrath. The floods are their domain spilling out, reaching for the arrogant, the careless, the greedy. The town of Atimonan, Quezon, as described by E.D. Unknown, is a place where this belief is etched into the very coastline. The town, famous for its proximity to the sea, even boasts a statue of a sirena on a coastal rock, a monument not just to folklore, but perhaps to a necessary reverence. The surrounding bay, named Lamon Bay, is said to take a life every year. The bodies of the drowned men sometimes found covered in long feminine hair, the chilling signature of the sirena's deadly embrace. The name itself, Lamon, means to devour or to swallow, a stark declaration of the bay's predatory nature. The story shared by Anining from her friend Marian illustrates this deadly exchange perfectly. It is the tale of Joseph, a man who fished in a local river believed to be home to a sirena. He caught a prize, a large, brilliantly orange goldfish, an impossible catch for a murky river. He put the fish in a jar. As the beautiful, strange fish began to weaken, Joseph too grew sick. The man and the captive creature, fatefully linked, died at the very same moment. When the family threw the dead goldfish back into the river, it came to life and vanished instantly. The local conclusion was inevitable. The fish was a sirena in disguise, and Joseph's death was the price paid for his hubris in trying to contain a creature of the wild sea. This narrative echoes a global superstition about taking things from nature that do not belong to you. Across many cultures, the unnatural capture of an animal or a beautiful natural object is seen as an offense to the spirits of the place, incurring a curse or a deadly misfortune. The sirena, in this case, acts as the ultimate enforcer of ecological balance, reminding humans that they are guests, not masters, of the wild places. The spiritual weight of water is immense, and its power to trap or claim souls is not confined to the large, devouring bays. It flows even into the small bodies of water near human habitation, such as the Wawa Park or Lakeside Park in Angono, a town famous for its artists and its folklore, as shared by Sari. Sari's experience shows how quickly a moment of human recklessness can be interpreted as a spiritual transgression. Heartbroken and dramatic, she decided to vent her sorrow by throwing stones into the lake, shouting her frustrations to the water. A few days later, she was violently ill with a fever and strange rashes that refused to be cured by conventional medicine. Her mother eventually consulted a traditional healer who performed nagtatawas, a divination ritual where a candle's wax is dripped into a basin of water to form an image. The shape that solidified in the basin was clear, the tail and torso of a sirena. The healer's diagnosis was chilling. Sari had disturbed and struck a water spirit on the first day of the new moon, a time of heightened spiritual energy. Her sickness was a spiritual backlash, a gentle warning or a curse. She was instructed to return to the lake, offer a gift, and beg for forgiveness. Only after performing this ritual did her persistent fever finally break. The story is a powerful cultural lens on how the Filipino view of the supernatural is not something abstract, but a tangible, reactive part of the environment. The spirits of the water are proximate and responsive. They hear the insults, feel the impact of a thrown stone, and they possess the power to punish or to claim. This concept of spiritual punishment for natural offense finds its parallel in Western traditions, such as the idea of the undine or water nymph that takes revenge on men who break their vows or disrespect the water source. In the Philippines, however, the fear is amplified by the frequent, devastating reality of typhoons and floods. The sirena and siakoy are not just mythical figures. They are the personification of the flood's power, and every catastrophic rainstorm reinforces the necessity of appeasement and respect. The very physical appearance of these spirits also ties into the trauma of sudden death by drowning. The encounter shared by JR at an unnamed beach, where both he and his brother panicked after witnessing what they thought was a sirena, highlights the immediate, visceral terror. The image described by another rescued victim, a sirena with the face of a fish and human hands, is a terrifying departure from the beautiful temptress. This grotesque image suggests a dark fusion, a creature of the deep with a predatory, inhuman appearance, perhaps reflecting the sheer horror of being dragged down by an unidentifiable force in the swirling water. The deep history of the Philippines, particularly the pre-colonial era, offers clues as to why the connection between water, wrath, and the spiritual is so strong. Before the arrival of the Spanish, animistic beliefs dominated. Every forest, mountain, and body of water had its own presiding spirit, or encanto. These were not mere fairy tales. They were the unseen landlords of the land. The ocean, the ultimate source of life, food, and danger, was naturally viewed as the domain of the most powerful and demanding encanto. The Spanish-era colonization introduced Catholicism, which layered its own theological structure onto these ancient beliefs, often demonizing the indigenous spirits. However, the fear of the water spirits persisted, subtly transforming. The sirena became a fallen angel or a demonic entity. The siakoy became a malevolent monster, yet their core function remained. They were the guardians who punished ecological sin. The relentless waves and the terrifying floods were easily interpreted as the judgment of a higher power, whether that power was the Christian God or the furious water gods of the old faith. In a modern context, the recurrence of powerful, destructive typhoons and floods, exacerbated by climate change and rampant coastal development, only deepens this primal fear. The relentless storms are no longer random. They are interpreted as evidence that the sacred contract with the sea has been broken. Human greed, deforestation leading to mudslides, pollution killing the coral reefs, overfishing emptying the ocean, is literally bringing the sea's wrath to the doorstep. The story shared by Nicolo about his trip to Palawan perfectly captures this terrifying, immediate cause and effect relationship. As they were traveling by boat to a remote island, his sharp eyes caught a glimpse of a large green tail in the distant water. The boatman, a local, immediately recognized it as a sirena and delivered a dire prophecy. A sighting of the sirena meant a misfortune or accident would soon befall a vessel nearby. Within hours, they came upon the wreckage of a capsized small boat, its foreign passengers bobbing in the water, having escaped death thanks to their life vests. What is most chilling, however, is the tourist's account. She too saw a woman swimming underneath the boat. And Niccolo, realizing that two people had seen the sirena, instantly feared that another tragedy was imminent. The belief is clear. The spirit is not simply a passive entity. It is an active harbinger of disaster, a predictor of the ocean's immediate claim. The appearance of the water spirit is the disaster. The most extreme example of this perceived vengeance comes from Ate Mongnaniniwalasa Other Creatures, who shares the devastating story of her fisherman father in Mindoro. Her father, a traditional fisherman, speared a giant stingray, an unusual and immense catch, but lost it in the deep, though he managed to wound it near the eye. That night, his left eye began to swell with excruciating pain. The pain was so intense he would bang his head against the wall. Doctors could find no cure, calling it an unknown ailment. Local spiritual healers were also powerless, claiming the entity behind the curse was too strong. Finally, the father had a dream. The sirena appeared. She was not the beautiful, glamorous creature of the movies, but a being whose appearance he struggled to describe. She told him that the stingray he had wounded was her vehicle or familiar, and that his suffering was her curse. She could not lift the curse completely, she said, but she could relieve the pain. The next morning, the crushing pain was gone, but his left eye was left permanently scarred. A white glass-like film over the pupil. A chilling, lasting mark of the sirena's power and a reminder of the price of his offense against the creatures of the sea. In the wake of such elemental catastrophes, where nature itself seems to turn against humanity, the stories of the sirena and siakoi offer a way to process the chaos. They provide a villain, a focus for the anger and fear that simply being swept away by wind and rain cannot satisfy. It is easier to deal with a powerful, vengeful being whose anger can be appeased than it is to grapple with the indifferent, unfeeling violence of a tropical depression. The ancient, sunken world is a constant undercurrent to these stories. The Isla Ingpatay, or Island of the Dead in Quezon, mentioned in another account, is said to have once been a terrestrial cemetery that sank into the sea, now a watery graveyard. This legend merges the two primal fears, the sudden, watery death of the sirena's victim and the ultimate decay of the drowned. Lolo Isco, a drunken fisherman who encountered a beautiful sirena near the island, was lured to his death with promises of submerged treasure. The sirena's face, when she pulled him under, transformed into a hideous mask, and the seabed he saw was a horrifying landscape of skulls and old coffins. He was dragged into his final resting place, a waterlogged grave in the sunken cemetery. The sirena, in this narrative, is the ultimate gatekeeper of the drowned, ensuring that the sea holds on to what it claims. Even in moments of perceived benevolence, the power of these spirits remains unsettling. Kung Fu Kenny shares the story of Aling Josie, a midwife in a remote Camarines Sur barrio who earned her unique healing gift from a sirena. Aling Josie found the sirena trapped in a shallow crevice during a low tide, a beautiful, pale creature with gold-shining hair and sharp black eyes. After helping the spirit return to the deep water, the sirena left her a single strand of golden hair as a reward. In a dream, the spirit instructed her to use the gift to help her fellow humans. Aling Josie placed the golden hair in a jar of oil and used it to anoint the stomachs of expectant mothers. In a village where many infants died during childbirth, her new method was a miracle, saving countless lives. The sirena, in this instance, became a benevolent, albeit unpredictable, divine patron, offering a boon to humanity for a single act of kindness. Yet even in this tale of help, the source of the power is the wild, untamed water spirit, a reminder that the creatures of the deep are not simply monsters. They are powerful beings whose mood dictates the fate of mortals. The tales of the Sirena and the trauma of the flood are interwoven in the Philippine psyche, a powerful dark tapestry that reflects both the beauty of the island nation and the terrifying reality of its constant peril. The sheer force of a disaster like Typhoon Feria is not just a meteorological event. It is a spiritual convulsion, a moment when the hidden world of the Encanto bleeds violently into the world of men. The victims of the storm are not just lost to the water. They are claimed by the Sirena and the sea coil, taken to a sunken realm that demands a toll. The stories submitted by our listeners are a poignant mix of historical trauma, localized legend, and profound personal fear. They paint a picture of a nation that looks at the swirling floodwaters and sees not just mud and debris, but the wrathful eyes of the water spirits, demanding justice for the polluted shores and the disturbed depths. The lost souls of the children, the chained footsteps of the unquiet dead, the vengeful mark on a fisherman's eye. These are the lingering shadows of the flood, the silent, terrifying testimony that in the Philippines, the water is always listening, and the sea folk always remember. If you have a story that touches on the deep, unsettling veins of Philippine folklore, dark history, or the paranormal, submit your stories to our email, storiesphpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find show notes and support options in the description of this episode, including ways to access exclusive content on Patreon, and follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. The deep water hides many secrets, and we continue to listen for them. The memory of the water, the feel of the current dragging at the ankles, the sight of a beautiful, terrifying creature in the turbulent water. This is the enduring legacy of the typhoon. When the rain next begins to fall and the rivers begin to swell, will you look to the sky, or will you look to the water, wondering what is rising from the depths to collect its due? What unholy contract binds the land to the sea? And what terrible debt must humanity pay when the heavens open? A drop of the ocean is all we are, but the ocean is all of us. We invite you to join us next time for another journey into the shadowy heart of the Philippine Islands and to explore the stories that refuse to be forgotten. Do not forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast. Support the podcast financially in ways you can find in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in, and good night.